Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behaviour Change Podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behaviour. My name is Jamie West and I'm joined today by Professor Robert West. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing really well. It's a lovely sunny day again.
It's been amazing.
It has.
It's very hot. I'm due to go and see Neil Young, Van Morrison and Yusuf Islam / Cat Stevens tomorrow. So it's going to be in Hyde Park, so it's going to be quite hot.
The Hyde Park concert. How fantastic.
Anyway, shall we get on? We are talking about decision-making in this first season of Unlocking Behaviour Change, and we've been working our way through the FACET framework, and we actually made it all the way to the end of the FACET framework. Can you believe that?
I can believe that, but we only achieved that by skipping over about 90% of it.
That's what you have to do. That's what a podcast is all about. That's why there'll be the book coming out in due course and people can get a more detailed view of it from that. But I thought what we'd do this episode would be to go through FACET in terms of how it applies to real world decisions, which is what we've been talking about, but kind of put it all together today. I want to put everything together. So even if you've missed the previous episodes, I think this one will still make sense.
Yes, I think so too. I think there's a lot of different facets that we might want to cover, but in doing so with a specific decision, I think it will help to bring it to life, even though the decision that we've chosen is not one that everyone who's listening to this will have made themselves. But I think it will be one to which everyone can identify, and it will hopefully illustrate that even with what sometimes can seem a very straightforward decision, actually there are a lot of facets to it that make a difference to how that decision then plays out.
And you're sort of teasing what it is, but what we're going to be talking about today is stopping smoking, which is your field that you've been studying for a few years now. You're sort of, I don't know how many years it's been now.
Well, it has been, I started studying it in 1982, so apparently you're no mathematician, but you could probably work out it is now 2005. So it's...
Well, it's actually 2025, so...
Shit.
That was yeah. So 20 years have gone missing for you there. You might want to go looking for those.
Anyway, it's 43 years.
So, okay, let's get to it. Just a quick recap of FACET, of what it stands for: framing, assessing, comparing, enacting, and time. And we're going to go through those one by one. And of course, always with the caveat that when we're making real-world decisions, it doesn't necessarily move in a linear fashion. It rarely moves in a linear fashion, but being able to look at the facets of each decision under framing or assessing, etc., can help you make sense of the process, and it helps us build a mental model that can help us when we make decisions and make better decisions.
Yeah, that's right. And so with framing, we're talking about how the decision presents itself to you as a decision maker, and how you approach the task in the first place. With assessing, it's how you analyze the options, how you assess the information about the options and come to value judgments or feelings of desire about one option or another. Comparing is how you then put that information together so that you make your selection among the options. Then enacting is how you go from that initial intention, which is the result of the decision, to action, and how you evaluate that and how that then may feed back into reworking some of the processes that you underwent sort of in an iterative way to arrive at a decision and that you're going to be happy with. And then timing is the way that time affects every aspect of this process. There's always some elements of time, whether it's because you can only think of one thing at a time or one or two things at a time, or whether it's because you're working under time pressure or whatever. So the FACET framework is a way of looking at the ways in which different decisions can vary across those 5 facets.
Very good. 10 points. So let's start. Someone is a smoker. Now, I'm stopping right here. What's the next step? We're going to be moving towards them stopping smoking.
Yeah, so this is all about the decision to make a quit attempt. In the field of smoking cessation or stopping smoking, there are two very different processes involved. And we're just going to consider the first of these, which is the getting to the starting gate and saying, right, I'm going to try and stop smoking. The other part of the process is about what happens next in terms of staying stopped. And they are very different because the first of these is a big decision-making task that you undergo. The second of these is very much about your capability and the opportunities that exist for to keep you going, keep you on track there. So your motivation to quit gets you to the starting gate, and your ability to quit tends to keep you going in that. But we're just looking at the first part of that, making the quit attempt. And if any of you out there are smokers, then one bit of advice I would give you is try and make at least one quit attempt a year. And just give it the best shot you can. Don't worry too much if it doesn't work, but just keep trying. And as we'll see as we go along in this podcast, use the methods that behavioral science have found will give you the best chance of achieving that.
I like that we've given specific advice to that portion of our audience. So they need to decide to stop. What prompts someone to decide to stop?
Right. So we're talking about framing, how the decision is framed. And as we mentioned in a previous episode, the presentation of the problem comes in 4 flavors: opportunity, threat, task, goal. And how you construe this will then condition what goes on. In many cases for smokers, the way it presents itself is a threat. So very often, for example, you've got some really bad cough and it just won't go away, or you go to the doctor and the doctor says, if you don't stop smoking, you've got serious risk of heart disease, lung cancer, and so on. But it could also be construed as an opportunity for a healthier, better life. I'm involved at the moment in some work with the Department of Health, looking at the positive in terms of your psychological well-being and feeling good, the positive benefits that you get quickly from making a lifestyle change, whether it's increasing the amount of exercise you do, stopping smoking, and so on. And one of the interesting things about stopping smoking is, contrary to what the tobacco industry and some people might say, people's quality of life, their enjoyment of life, their life satisfaction actually gets better when you stop smoking. It's not that, okay, you're going to live longer, but it's going to be miserable. Quite the opposite. Very soon, you actually feel better. So you can construe that task or that decision as an opportunity and not just as a threat. So it's not just, I need to stop smoking because, otherwise I'm going to, not get old and arthritic or whatever. It's, I want to stop smoking because it will make me feel better. So you could construe it as a threat or an opportunity. You could potentially think of it as a task. You could say, right, I've set myself the task of stopping smoking. This is what I'm going to do. And that's how I'm going to approach it. All of those things are things that, yes, the decision is presented to you or comes to you in a particular way, but then it's how you think about it that then can help to dictate what you do next.
So whether you frame it as an opportunity, a threat, a task, or a goal can actually, it sounds like, color the whole way that you view everything that follows. Because if you view it as an opportunity and you're able to do that, it may feel very positive to you. If you view it as a threat, you may think of it quite differently. That may also work for you because smoking is a threat to your short and long-term health.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how big an impact that frame can have on everything afterwards.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a bit of both. But when you're confronted with a decision like this, making a conscious effort to say, this is how I'm going to approach it. With something like keeping your weight down, as you know, in my case, for example, I count calories and make a special effort to keep my weight within certain limits. I'm not doing that because I see it as a threat. It is a somewhere between a sort of goal and an opportunity for me. I think of it as a kind of hobby, and I think that's a positive way of framing that particular activity.
Some people play table tennis. You like to get on the scales. Yeah, fair enough. I would like to know. You should write into us if you also have it as a hobby, and what other strange hobbies do you have? That'll be the phone in. There is no phone in on this show, but if there was one. And so let's continue thinking about the frame of this in a basic sense. The frame is also, shall I stop smoking or not, even before that. So maybe you've gone, shall I stop smoking? Yes. And then next part of that frame is how you're viewing the next phase of the process.
Well, yeah, I mean, so it may or may not be. So, again, what we're trying to do is to help people think more creatively and broadly about decisions so that they make sure that they frame them in the way that's going to be most adaptive. So if you see it as, shall I stop smoking or shall I continue smoking? Okay, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. But, so that's the X versus not X type frame. But what about the X versus Y type frame, or Z? Shall I stop smoking, or shall I switch to some much less harmful form of nicotine use? Let's say I quite like using nicotine. In some cases, you may say, well, actually, I'm not ready to give up on nicotine just yet. But actually, as it happens, there's other forms of nicotine that I can use, whether it's the medicinal products, e-cigarettes, nicotine pouches, or even you might, in some cases, say, well, but what about a non-combustible form of tobacco use? This is a big debate in the whole area of smoking cessation. But what isn't really in question is that smoking tobacco is the most harmful and horrible thing you can do with tobacco and with nicotine. And so even if, let's say you're making the decision and it were to be, shall I stop smoking or shall I not? And you go, no, I'm not. I will carry on smoking. Reframe it as, well, actually, my goal is to have a healthier, happier life. What can I do to do that? It might be, well, why don't I switch to an e-cigarette or some other form of tobacco use? So even there, something that appears very, very simple can be reframed in a way that may, for some people, be more adaptive.
I like that. It's a kind of more expansive, open approach. And also when you even think about questioning what frame you're using, it allows you to open up and potentially have something that is a bit less restrictive. As you say, should I do this or not do this? And you can actually think in a broader way about the many choices you might have.
That's right. And then one of the other facets that immediately then comes in is how rigidly are we defining these options? And that's an area where, again, even with really simple decision, what appears to be a simple decision like stopping smoking, there are nuances. So in a lot of cases, smokers, when they start smoking, will say, well, you know what? I'm going to allow myself to smoke a bit. So it's not X or Y rigidly. And we know from countless studies and obviously millions of smokers' experiences that actually if you don't put these very clear boundaries around these behaviors, whichever ones you decide to choose, then it all goes to hell in a handcart. So the rigidity is, in this case, is actually a good thing. A lot of decisions, it's not necessarily a good thing, but in the case of smoking cessation, because of the way that nicotine acts on the brain, et cetera, you've got to set the very clear boundaries around your behavior. If you're stopping smoking, you are stopping smoking. That's really important.
Right. And that can change depending, as you say, on what the decision is. In this case, being like, I'm just not a puff no matter what. I remember from my Stop Smoking Advisor training, which I went through as a part of my research for writing the smoke-free formula, which we did some years back. But I remember that not a puff no matter what. Quite like that. So there's also a way in which when you're taking a decision like stopping smoking, it's not just a single decision, it's going to affect many things going forward. It creates a cluster of decisions in some ways. So you're going to think, I have to make a new decision potentially about where I go out or how I go out with my friends or the kind of thing I might say when someone offers me a cigarette. That's going to have to be a new decision you may have to prepare in advance.
Yeah, exactly. So decision clustering is something that is good to be aware of when you embark on a decision sort of journey, as it were. And as you say, you mentioned a couple of the sort of decisions that then follow on from this initial decision. But other key ones are what support shall I use to help me to achieve this goal? So there's decisions to be made about, shall I use some form of prescription medicine like Champix or cytosine or nicotine replacement therapy? So there's decisions to be made about that. There's decisions to be made about what kind of approach you're going to use to avoiding stop smoking cues, and so on. So, one thing leads to another. And very often when you embark on this sort of decision journey, you find that you revisit some of your original decisions, and so the thing becomes more fluid. But in the case of stopping smoking, essentially, you want to try to make sure that you're very clear on your first decision, and that everything else that you decide on then is in the service of making that decision work. And again, the little bit of advice for any smokers out there, most attempts to stop smoking are made without using any form of science or evidence-based support or help, and people are dying every year as a result of that. It is crazy to try to stop smoking without using any of the support that is available and there for people that will make a difference to the chances of success. It's like trying to cure yourself of cancer. Why would you do that? It makes no sense. So there's a lot of this sort of ancillary or knock-on decision-making where there's some thought that needs to be put into it to get the best out of the original decision.
I mean, there are people who do stop, they go cold turkey and they do stop. Isn't that right?
Oh, of course. It is about probabilities. It's about what are the chances. And you don't know when you embark on this process what your chances are going to be in your individual case. And so what you do is why not give yourself the best chance possible? One way that we put it in our book is that if you try and stop smoking without any help or support, it's like having two dice and you've got to roll 2 6s. That's about what the chances of long-term success are. If you use the most evidence-based support, then you can take one of those dice away and you're now just rolling 1 dice. And okay, lots of people roll 2 dices and roll 2 6s on a given occasion. Fantastic. Good for them. But why do that? Why take that risk? Why not give yourself the best chance?
I understand where you're coming from. I really hear you on that.
I'm sure you do, Joby.
So far, we've been talking about stopping smoking as though it's just an individual person, an individual decision. But there are times in which someone you're living with, perhaps your partner, perhaps a relative, is also a smoker, and you may decide to take a decision together. So there is a sense in which you can ask, how much is this a collective decision or a joint decision, and how much is it just my decision?
Yeah, collectiveness is another part of the decision frame, and responsibility. Who's responsible for it? Who's taking responsibility? So in the case of smoking cessation, very often people are prompted to try to stop smoking by their children or a partner or something or a GP or a health professional. And they will involve other people in the process. About 50% of attempts to quit in the UK are made by people who involve other people in that process. They tell other people. And that can be helpful because then they can give you kind of support that you need in order to be able to do it, or at least not get in your way, not keep offering you cigarettes when you're trying to stop, that kind of thing. So collectivity is one factor. But ultimately, with something like smoking, it is going to be your choice. It's not a group decision as such. Whereas with other kinds of decisions, they are very much group decisions. They might be democratic decisions within a group, or they might be, just decisions in which people have to reach a consensus or whatever. But in this particular case, ultimately, smokers are going to be saying, yeah, this is something I need to do.
And they are personally responsible. But there is a sense from what I have heard from people who run group stop smoking sessions in which the group can either kind of succeed quite well or fail. They kind of seems to go in one of two directions. They all seem to do very well, or they all seem to kind of fall off the wagon a bit.
Yeah, when group support for smoking cessation was introduced on a large scale in the UK by my friend and colleague Peter Hayek, then one of the things we observed very early on was what we called group effects. That's to say, groups tended either to succeed very well, or if they failed quite badly. So, and obviously that's because of interactions between members of the group. If you see other people succeeding with you and you feel part of a successful operation, then that's motivating. Whereas if you see people dropping out, then it can be demotivating. So even in something like smoking cessation, once you get to the point where you're actually trying to stop, which is the second part of the process, then the issue of collectivity can play a role.
And there is a sense, I suppose what I was getting at was a feeling of responsibility to the group, to others, right, which is somewhat being harnessed.
Yeah, that's true. And a lot of smokers in these groups would say, one of the reasons why they carried on, they decided, to resist that temptation to have a puff on a cigarette, is they didn't want to let the group down. So there is a sense of group responsibility there.
And I suppose also at this early stage of still framing, there is a question of how structured the whole decision process is going to be. And I think in the case of smoking, that it can be, you can go and join a group, you can go and see your GP, and then they get you on a program, and usually they try and get you to stop for about 28 days, because that's, as I understand it, a key cutoff point, after which your chances are greatly enhanced.
Yeah, I mean, we're moving into the post-quit attempt phase here. We're looking at how you succeed in stopping smoking, but certainly in that case, structuring the process can be and is very helpful. Most of the stop smoking courses or treatment programs in the UK now go on for 8 to 12 weeks. Because often the medication course is a 12-week course.
So it's longer.
So it is longer than it used to be. It was 4 weeks, you're absolutely right. But that structuring there is around the implementation side. Sort of we're going into the enact phase really more. Okay. In the framing phase, or how you construe the decision, I would say that in a stop smoking decision, it'd be quite rare for people to do that in a very structured, methodical way. In fact, quite the opposite. Over 50% of attempts to stop smoking are made without any pre-planning whatsoever. They're made just like, that's it. And this person suddenly decides, I'm going to have a go at stop smoking, and that's it. And what's interesting is that those quit attempts are actually more likely to succeed than the ones that involve pre-planning.
That is very interesting. Any idea why that would be?
I have ideas, one of the candidates that I think I probably would subscribe to is that when you decide that you're going to stop smoking and you implement it straight away, you can't wait. It says something about your state of mind that you've actually reached this sort of road to Damascus type aha experience. And motivationally, that's different from saying, well, yeah, I'm going to stop smoking, but I'm not going to stop right now. I'm going to do it in a week or two's time or whatever. So I think it's probably that it reflects a mindset, which is, I can't wait to put this quit attempt into effect. I'm just going to get on with it.
So I'm trying to get my head around, I guess, the multiple decisions that are involved in stopping smoking, because the first decision point there is, in some frame, should I stop smoking? Should I continue smoking? And however we've discussed the different ways that you might think about that, how could I live healthier? The ultimate end point of that is a kind of, I'm going to stop smoking cigarettes.
As we were saying a bit earlier, it could be, shall I stop smoking or not? Shall I switch to e-cigarettes? Shall I switch to another form of tobacco? Whatever it might, the decision could be one or more of those. Well, it could be one of those things. Let's take the sort of journey here, rather quick journey of a smoker from they're walking down the street, they see someone, let's say, smoking and hacking away, and they think, oh my goodness, what am I doing? I've had it with smoking. They say, right, I'm never going to smoke another cigarette. Okay, so that's not that uncommon. It's a common occurrence. And the decision frame is, I shall stop smoking, right? Then what may well happen is that having made that decision, they think, well, okay, I've heard about these ways that you can increase your chances of stopping, so I'm going to pop into the chemist and get some nicotine replacement therapy. Or I'm going to make an appointment to go and see the doctor to get a prescription for Champix. Or I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to sign up for one of my free local stop smoking services. So, there's a post-decisional cluster of decisions that goes on after that. But the first decision was very much a spontaneous, off-the-cuff type of decision.
And that shows how using the FACET framework, it might be a very quick thing in the case of seeing someone in the street, and then you make a decision, 10 seconds later, it might be as fast as that. And another one might involve a lot more thought and preparation of maybe how you enact that decision, which is itself many decisions going forward as well, because that's the nature of decision making, as it flourishes out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm going to be upfront with the listener here. It did occur to me about 10 minutes into this episode that it was going to be a multi-part episode. And I did plan the episode in advance, but you know what? The best laid plans, etc., etc. So it looks like we're going to be covering each of the different facets of FACET, potentially an episode of their own, and we'll see how it goes, because there's actually quite a lot of richness here that we didn't get to cover when we initially introduced framing. And Robert, I think you want to talk through a few of the other parts of framing that are also applicable to most decisions or many decisions.
Yeah, and we won't go into the details of them here. Each one of them has their own area of research associated with it, and they're all potentially interesting and relevant, but I'll just very, very briefly take people through them. So apart from the ones that we've looked at, one of the ones that makes a big difference to how decisions ultimately turn out is what we've called thoroughness. That's the extent to which the decision maker uses all the relevant information about the different options. Another facet, which is very interesting and makes a difference to how decisions turn out, is whether there's some kind of preconceived outcomes. So in some decisions, you've kind of already got your default option. This is what I'm planning to do. And the decision is checking to see whether actually it's what you want to do. And that makes a difference, rather than approaching the decision from a purely open-ended perspective. Also, there's issues around whether the decision is part of a routine series. Is it a kind of decision that you make a lot, in which case you're going to employ different methods from if you are coming at it for the first time. There's decisions, approaches, or framings that involve trial and error. To what extent am I going to try something, see if it works, go back, and so on. There's issues around the extent to which decisions are reversible. Very importantly, the ones to just finish on are the extent to which the decisions involve conflict and stress. A lot of decisions that we make, it doesn't matter that much. It could go one way, it could go the other way. You're in the supermarket, you buy this, you buy that. It's not a big deal. You're not that conflicted about it. But others are obviously really conflicted. And that makes a big difference to the whole way that you process the information and so on. And you can also be stressed for other reasons, whether we discussed later about whether you're under time pressure or whether there's a lot of else going on in your life. In the case of smoking, for example, you very often find that people really, really don't want to make a decision about stopping and so on if there's too much else going on in their lives, if their job is under threat or they're under a lot of stress with their family and so on, and they feel, well, look, I'm just not ready to make the decision about this right now. So those are facets associated with framing that all make a difference.
Yeah, it's fascinating how many there are and how each of them, you can expand out, and we could do whole podcasts on just routine decisions and how we implement those and how we view them. So, and then of course, the idea of how much a decision stresses us out is absolutely massive. But I think, again, each of these facets of framing is a window into our psychology, into how we work. And it's not like you need to think of all of these things, but it's good to know about them so that when things come up, you can go, oh, actually, that helps me make sense of it. You can kind of label something and keep it in its helpful box.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of these things as a sort of like a checklist or a memoir to sort of run through so that at least we're not neglecting them when we're making decisions or analysing other people's decisions, because as we may come to in a later episode, it can help you to diagnose when decisions have gone wrong as to what facet or facets of the decision were responsible for that.
And for those of you who haven't yet subscribed to Robert's Substack, what is the address for that? Or where does it go? Robert's looking at me like I have no idea.
Unlocking Behaviour Change.
The link is in the description, so that will save all the trouble there. And I think it remains for me to say that we will be back looking at assessing and how that relates to stopping smoking and other types of decision. It's been quite interesting today, actually. It feels, even my view of how the FACET framework can be implemented is expanding with every one of these we do.
And mine too, Jamie.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. And please like and subscribe and review the podcast kindly if you are so inclined. And we very much look forward to joining you next time on the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast.